Hi everyone, this is Maya, and this is my video on how I went from hating ebooks to preferring them over paper books. For some background, I have ADHD. I've had it always, but I was not diagnosed until I was in my 20s because a lot of girls hyperfocus, and that's a symptom of ADHD that's more common in girls, and it allows us to compensate for some of the symptoms that boys sometimes struggle with in school. So rather than being unable to read and being unable to focus, I could literally tune out the world and get so deeply involved in a book that I would have no comprehension of what was going on around me as far as people trying to talk to me or whatever, as long as I could read fast enough. If I read slowly, I would have no idea what I was reading. So growing up, I was always an extremely fast reader with a really, really high above average reading comprehension level. Then I went to college. And in college, I was reading a lot of nonfiction and a lot of journal articles, which is a different type of reading. I was taking a lot of notes, I was reading much slower. And all through, I would maybe read one book a year. At one point, the only book I would read that was fiction would be like one Harry Potter book a year, and then everything else I was reading was nonfiction. So I came out of college and started wanted to go back to my love of reading, and I would pick up a fiction book and I would read it, and I wouldn't enjoy it at all. I wasn't able to picture what was happening. I wasn't able to understand what was happening. I would have to reread paragraphs. It got so frustrating that I just kept stopping over and over and over. But I used to love reading, and I was always such a great reader that I started wondering if maybe my ADD had gotten worse from college. Maybe I had, was it even possible? Maybe I developed a reading disorder, which doesn't really seem possible to develop one after the fact, just didn't make any sense. And I just kept trying to get back into reading, and it was this constant struggle. So then I got the first ebook. I thought, well, maybe it's just because I read a lot of TV, I'm on the computer a lot, and books are heavy. Maybe if I have something that's really lightweight and I can carry it around with me, I'll read more. So I got this. This is the one with the keyboard. It's the old one, and I still miss this keyboard. It was great for taking notes. I got it because I thought maybe it would be easier for me to read fiction. What I found was it was actually harder to read fiction on this Kindle. So this became my nonfiction PDF article reader. I would go on Instapaper and I would have my clippings sent to my Kindle. I would use it for that, and it was great because it had the turn buttons. But when it came to reading fiction, I would try to read on this, and I wasn't able to actually understand what I was reading because it was slowing me down. My reading speed on this Kindle was significantly slower than on paper. So when people would ask me, "Do you like ebooks?" I would always say, "No." I'm fine with them for like short journal articles. I would send them to my Kindle. If I needed to read a nonfiction book with information I wanted to pull from it that I wasn't deeply reading, that I just needed to skim and find the points and then use those points, it was fine for that. But no, I don't like ebooks. So then my ex at the time got me this one because he heard me say I loved my Kindle, not really understanding that I meant I loved it for nonfiction. And this was, I think it was called the Kindle Touch, and it was great. I loved it. Uh, and I decided, okay, let's try the fiction thing again because the screen was better. The screen was sharper than the old one. And I thought, yeah, well, it's new and it's fuzzy and it's shiny and it's got bows. I'll try it. And again, I couldn't read fiction on it. I could read YA, like young YA on it. I got through part of the Mortal Instruments. I got through Genius Squad, like kid books. And because those types of books I can zip through really quickly, uh, I could use my Kindle for that. But if I tried to read anything like the literary fiction, short stories, anything that I had to think about, my reading comprehension again nosedived. And I didn't really understand why. Because, I mean, reading a book, reading a Kindle, it should be the same experience, but it really wasn't. I could sit down with a paper book and read it, and yeah, I was slower than I used to be, but I could get through a book in a couple weeks. And on this, it would just take forever. I would never get through it. And then one day, something really miraculous happened. In August, I was in the War and Peace read along, and I was trying to keep up, because I'm a slower reader. It takes so long to read War and Peace anyway. It was like an hour to read 15 to 20 pages. And so I needed to be able to read wherever I was. And I was carrying this big paperback version of War and Peace around with me wherever I went. And I was at work and I left my book at home. And there was like a football game on at work and it was dead. And I was standing there. I was like, I need to be reading. Well, let me try my phone. Everyone keeps saying reading on their phone, young people and their phones and the Wattpads and yeah, I sound old. So I got the Kindle app on my phone and I downloaded War and Peace and I started reading. And my reading comprehension was higher than when I was reading on the Kindle, like significantly higher. And that was confusing. So then I did some looking at ADD and visual processing. And what I found was the idea that the white background, the brighter white background with the dark gray letters, allows the brain to recognize the difference between the background and the words. Whereas the light gray background and the gray letters takes like fractions of a second longer for you to be able to visually process the difference between the background and the letters that make up the words that you're reading. So I was literally recognizing the words and capable of reading faster on the phone. So I started reading on my phone. The problem was I couldn't read whole novels on my phone because I would have to swipe to turn the page and my wrist would hurt. It would actually like start to bother my wrists and I need to be able to type and carpal tunnel's scary. And so I wanted to read on my phone because the comprehension was higher and it was convenient, but I couldn't really do it because it would hurt my wrist. And so again, I was going back to paper books. So when my friend Michael published his poetry collection, I bought a paper version thinking, I don't want to deal with an ebook. And then afterwards, I got the ebook version and, just to check his formatting and to give him some feedback. And when I did that, I discovered that I could read nonfiction, but I could also read poetry on the original Kindle. And then I kept thinking back to that experience on the phone, though. Because when I read on the phone, my comprehension was high. It just wasn't a good reading experience. And then I saw the newer Kindles. And I started kind of thinking, well, maybe the Kindle Paperwhite would do it. Maybe the Kindle Paperwhite would do it. And in the end, I ended up getting the Kindle Voyage because I'm broke. And so if I'm going to get something, I need it to last. And I wanted the flatter screen because my old Kindles used to get crumbs and stuff around the ledge. And so I did go ahead and get a Kindle Voyage, and I really had to think about it a long time. I kept going into Best Buy and looking at them, physically trying to read on them. And I kind of thought, I had a feeling that it would be a different experience, but I didn't realize how different of an experience my Kindle Voyage would be. So first, to cover the problems I had before, as far as visual processing, those issues were gone. While it's not a stark white background, so it doesn't hurt my eyes, it's a white enough background that I'm perfectly capable of recognizing the difference between the background and the letters fast enough that allows me to read quickly. That was the biggest difference on the Kindle Voyage. And that's what moved me from being unable to read an ebook to being able to read an ebook. Once I crossed that hurdle, there were some things that made me move from from capable of reading an ebook to preferring to read an ebook. And it kind of snuck up on me slowly. The first time I realized it happened was I was reading Howl's Moving Castle in paperback, and I was laying in bed reading it, and I suddenly had the thought, I really wish I had this on my Kindle. And that's when I knew something significant had changed, because not only was I capable of reading on my ebook, but over time, within a couple weeks, I was faster on my ebook. I was faster because I was processing it more quickly, but also because turning the page, and this is going to sound really silly, but when you're holding a paper book, it has some weight to it, and depending on how you're sitting, it can be a little heavy, and you're physically turning the page, just like when you're physically swiping the page. But the Kindle Voyage has these haptic page turn buttons on the side, and a lot of people, when they looked at the original Voyage, they thought those were just ridiculous and people wouldn't use them and they were gimmicky. But when you set them to really sensitive, um, it's faster and it doesn't hurt your wrist when you're turning the page. So you can turn pages really quickly as you're physically reading. It saves time with that. Second, because I'm only seeing one page at a time, if I'm reading an 800 or 1400 page book, I'm not getting psychologically intimidated by the thickness of my novel. And I'm only seeing what I'm reading, and it sucks me in more deeply so that I'm not intimidated by the size of the content. Then the next thing that sped me up was I like literary fiction. I like classics. I like learning new words. And I typically, when I read a paper book, I stop periodically and have to go get my dictionary. Even if I have my dictionary right next to me, I'm picking it up and reading it. And I remember when I read Orlando, I had two different dictionaries because I had regular English and then like English. And, you know, having to look things up in different places to more fully understand what I was reading takes time. Being able to just touch the word and have the dictionary pop up and then click more and look at the alternate meanings of words was such a huge convenience, but it also allowed me to not get pulled out as far in the story and to continue reading fast enough that I didn't lose my reading comprehension as I was looking up words. The other thing is, I like to take notes in my books as I'm reading. But again, it slows me down because of the processing, the visual processing things with my ADD. And in here, what I do is I highlight things and I can take notes. And while the touch keyboard kind of sucks, I can read my own typos. Not a big deal. The benefit is I can take all my notes and my highlights and everything, and then when I'm all done with the short story or the novel, I can go to one page, see all my notes and quotes and things, and transfer those into a notebook. Because I do like to have a notebook that I can refer back to upon rereading, or if I'm doing any kind of studying, or if I want to talk about something. So that's really awesome because now it's faster. And again, it doesn't pull me out of the story as much to go ahead and take those notes and to underline and to highlight. So that was really, really great. So as I was reading it, just over time, I started preferring it. And then it got to the point where I was reading Middlesex. I was like, no, I need this on ebook. And I went ahead and got the ebook, even though I already had the paper book. And then I was realizing I like this ebook thing. So then I joined Kobo and I started to use the Kobo app on my phone, but that I didn't like it as much. So then I used it on my tablet, and again, the Kindle Voyage was better for me than the tablet, and I think it's because of the glare from the screen affects my visual processing. So all this is to say, if you have previously tried ebooks and you did not like them, if it was because reading an ebook was harder than reading a paper book, you might want to try the different ways of reading ebooks because depending on how your eyes and your brain are working in synergy with each other, you may find that reading a Kindle Wide or a Kindle Voyage will be really different than reading an ebook on your phone or on an iPad or on an older Kindle. And this is also to say to all of the publishers and to people that read a lot of literary fiction. I know we get really, really snobby about our books. Okay. I do the same thing. I love my Shakespeare. I have it all in paper, all that stuff. But I gotta say, being able to look up words and get right back in the story significantly changes the reading experience when you're talking about classics and more complicated literature. And soon, the X-ray that Kindle is trying to promote When that becomes more common in literary fiction, I think you're really going to see ebooks take off, because what X-ray does is it allows you to find out more about the book and to look at, like, you can do an X-ray of a word and it'll tell you where that word appears elsewhere in the book. So if you're reading War and Peace and you come up against a Kutuzov and there are 4 different people in the book with the same darn name, the X-ray function will be really helpful for distinguishing which character are they actually talking about. Is it Kutuzov number 1? Is it his son? Is it his grandfather? Is it his cousin? That X-ray function, I like the X-ray function, and while everyone's excited about it for fiction, I don't actually think it's going to be that useful for most people. I think where it's going to find its biggest usage is going to be for literary novels and classics with a lot of names. Like, the X-ray for that is just going to be amazing once all the publishers decide to go ahead and use it. So if you're a publisher, please use the X-ray, especially if you have a book that has a lot of characters. Game of Thrones, any of those books with a lot of characters could really use with the X-ray. It'll improve the reader experience. So that's how I went from hating, oh, total nose in the air, I can't stand ebooks, hatred, to I already have this book, but I need to get it on ebook because I actually want to read it finally. Ciao.